in the aftermath of a devastating flood that swallowed an entire valley. Rescuers combing through the wreckage discovered a bobcat kitten, tiny, traumatized and barely clinging to life. Rushed to a wildlife rescue and sanctuary, he received the best care. But nothing could soothe his terror. He wouldn't eat. He wouldn't rest. He was fading away from fear itself, until Dr. Jenna placed a silly bright, yellow plush fish beside him. Without hesitation, the bobcat kitten grabbed it, tightly let out a tiny sigh and fell asleep mid-hug. And from that moment on, no matter how wild he looked, he never let go of that yellow fish. Because sometimes healing doesn't begin with medicine. It begins with a plush fish. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't. And hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The rain that fell on Tucker County, West Virginia, wasn't ordinary rain. It was a biblical deluge, a skyborne ocean that decided to empty itself over the ancient, folded mountains of the Appalachian. The Stillwater River, normally a placid ribbon of green winding through the valleys, became a churning, muddy beast. It devoured its banks, then swallowed fields, roads, and finally the small, clapboard houses nestled in its path. The sound was a constant deafening roar, a mixture of crashing water, splintering wood, and the groaning protest of a world being torn apart. When the waters finally grudgingly receded, they left behind a landscape of profound sorrow, a thick, foul-smelling silt-coated everything, a gray shroud over a drowned world. The silence that followed the roar was almost as unsettling. It was in this silence that the work of sifting through the wreckage began. Rescue teams composed of weary-faced volunteers and stoic National Guardsmen moved through the muck, their boots making sucking sounds with every step. They were looking for survivors, for anything that still drew breath in the flattened landscape. It was 2 days after the worst of it when a pair of volunteers, a grizzled old-timer named Earl and a fresh-faced college kid named Sam, were picking their way through the debris of what was once a small riverside cabin. A tangle of uprooted trees, splintered 2x4s, and the sad personal detritus of a lost life formed a massive dam against a stand of hardy oaks. As Earl was about to move on, convinced nothing could have survived in that mess, Sam held up a hand. "Wait," he whispered. "Did you hear that?" Earl, whose hearing aids were perpetually on the fritz, heard nothing but the buzz of flies. "Hear what, kid?" The mud settling. No, it was like a kitten. A really, really tiny one. They stood in silence, the oppressive humidity pressing in on them. Then they heard it again, a faint, high-pitched mooing so weak it was almost carried away by the breeze. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated misery. They followed the noise to the base of the debris pile, their eyes scanning the tangled mess. And then Sam saw it. Flicker of movement beneath a filthy, torn dish towel snagged on a broken branch. Carefully, as if dismantling a bomb, they began to move the debris. What they found underneath was a heartbreaking sight. It was a bobcat kitten no bigger than a man's hand. His fur, what little there was of it, was matted with mud and burrs. His body, a trembling skeletal frame. He was half starved, his ribs starkly visible beneath his thin coat. One of his eyes was swollen shut. He let out another weak cry, a sound that seemed impossibly large for such a tiny creature. Earl, a man who had seen his fair share of hardship, felt a lump form in his throat. He gently scooped the kitten up, wrapping him in a clean bandana from his pocket. The kitten was terrifyingly light, a fragile collection of bones and desperate life. "Well, I'll be," Earl murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Little scrapper, ain't you?" The kitten, too weak to fight, could only shiver violently in the palm of Earl's calloused hand. He was a wild thing born of the deep woods and ancient instinct. Yet here he was reduced to a helpless, shivering bundle. They knew he wouldn't last another day out here. There was only one place to take him. The Appalachian Wildlife Rescue and Sanctuary was a haven tucked away in a high valley that the floodwaters hadn't reached. It was a place of second chances run by a woman with a seemingly endless supply of patience and compassion. Dr. Jenna Williams. Jenna was in her late 40s with kind eyes that had seen both the miracle of birth and the finality of death in the animal kingdom. Her hands, though skilled and steady, with a scalpel or a syringe, were always gentle. When Earl and Sam arrived there, faces grim, she knew it was another victim of the flood. She met them at the clinic door, a clean towel already in her hands. "What have we got, Earl?" she asked, her voice soft. Earl simply opened his hands and showed her the pathetic, muddy creature within. Found him under a junk pile, barely hanging on. Jenna's professional demeanor clicked into place, but her eyes betrayed a deep well of sympathy. "Bring him in. Let's see what we're dealing with." She placed the kitten on the stainless steel examination table. He was even worse up close. He was severely dehydrated and malnourished, his temperature dangerously low. The burrs were embedded deep in his fur, pulling at his delicate skin. Jenna worked with practiced efficiency, her movements calm and reassuring. She spoke to the kitten in a low, soothing murmur as she began the painstaking process of cleaning him. "Okay, little guy," she whispered, her voice a gentle hum. "Let's get this mess off you. You're safe now. You're safe." She used tweezers to pluck out dozens of spiky burrs one by one. She gently wiped the mud from his face with a warm, damp cotton ball, carefully cleaning around his swollen eye. The kitten, whom she had decided to call Rusty for the reddish tinge of his emerging fur, trembled ceaselessly. He was too weak to hiss or spit, but his fear was a palpable thing in the quiet room. After he was clean, Jenna administered subcutaneous fluids to combat his dehydration and carefully syringed a special milk replacer for wild felines into his mouth. He drank weakly at first, then with a flicker of renewed strength, she wrapped him in a soft, heated towel and held him close to her chest, hoping her body heat and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat would calm him. But it didn't. For the next 24 hours, Rusty remained in a state of high alert. Though he was now clean, warm, and had a belly full of food for the first time in days, his tiny body was rigid with terror. He wouldn't settle. He wouldn't sleep. He would lie in his heated incubator, his one good eye wide and scanning for threats, letting out periodic, heart-wrenching cries that echoed through the clinic. Jenna and her small team of staff and volunteers tried everything. They played soft music. They made sure the room was dark and quiet. Jenna even recorded the sound of her own humming and played it on a loop. Nothing worked. The trauma of the flood, of losing his mother and siblings, of being alone and starving, was etched into his very being. "He's going to exhaust himself to death," said Hank, the sanctuary's gruff but golden-hearted groundskeeper, his face etched with worry. "The little fella needs to sleep." Jenna was at her wit's end. She sat by Rusty's incubator late on the second night, her heart aching with every cry. She knew that sleep was as crucial to his healing as food and medicine. Without it, his tiny, stressed body would simply give out. She looked around. The clinic, desperate for an idea. Any idea. Her eyes fell on a cardboard box in the corner filled with items donated by a local elementary school after a toy drive. It was mostly plastic action figures and board games with missing pieces, but on top sat slightly misshapen plush fish. It was a lurid shade of yellow. It had big plastic, googly eyes that were slightly crooked, and a wide stitched-on red smile. It was, objectively, a very silly-looking fish. On a desperate whim, an instinct she couldn't explain, Jenna reached into the box and pulled it out. It was soft and squishy. She opened the incubator door. Rusty, startled, tried to press himself into the far corner, his one eye wide with fear. "Hey now, easy there, Rusty," Jenna cooped. "I've got something for you." She gently placed the yellow fish plushie beside him. The reaction was instantaneous and astounding. The kitten stopped trembling. He stared at the fish for a long, silent moment. Then, with a hesitant, cautious movement, he reached out a tiny padded paw and touched it. He nudged it with his nose. He seemed to be assessing it. This strange, soft yellow creature that had appeared in his world of fear. Then, without any further hesitation, Rusty lunged. He didn't attack it. He embraced it. He wrapped his skinny front legs around the fish's middle, buried his face in its soft side, and clung to it, as if it were the last piece of driftwood in a raging sea. A sound rumbled in his chest, a sound Jenna hadn't heard from him yet. A tiny, sputtering purr. He adjusted his grip, kneaded his paws, his murder mittens as the staff would later affectionately call them, into the plush fabric, and let out a long shuddering sigh. It was a sigh of profound, absolute relief. And then, mid-hug, he fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Jenna watched, tears welling in her eyes. It was the breakthrough he needed. The ridiculous googly-eyed fish had done what medicine, warmth, and human kindness could not. It had given him a sense of security. It was his anchor in the storm of his trauma. She gently closed the incubator door, a wide smile spreading across her tired face. Hank, who had been watching from the doorway, just shook his head in amazement. "Well, I'll be," he grunted, a rare smile cracking his weathered face. He just needed a friend. From that night on, Rusty and the plush fish, which the staff unanimously named Finnegan, were inseparable. With the comfort of his companion, Rusty's recovery accelerated at an incredible pace. His appetite became voracious. His once skeletal frame began to fill out with lean muscle. His coat grew in thick and beautifully spotted, the distinctive markings of a healthy bobcat. His swollen eye healed completely, revealing two bright, intelligent, and mischievous golden orbs. He was a whirlwind of kitten energy. He pounced on dust bunnies, chased the swishing end of a broom, and practiced his stalking skills on unsuspecting volunteers' shoelaces. But through all his playful antics, Finnegan was never far away. He dragged the yellow fish with him everywhere. He would carry it by its tail, its head, or sometimes gripped awkwardly in the middle, the fish bumping along beside him as he explored his ever-expanding world. And when it was time to sleep, the ritual was inviolable. Rusty would play until he was exhausted. Then he would search for Finnegan. Once the fish was located, he would pick it up, carry it to his favorite sleeping spot a soft sheepskin rug in the corner of his large enclosure and proceed to wrestle it into submission, before curling up with it, his paws wrapped tightly around its plush body. His dependence on the fish for sleep became a sanctuary-wide legend. It was a source of endless amusement for the staff, the unwritten rule known by everyone from Jenna to the weekend volunteers was simple: no fish, no sleep. Forgetting the rule had consequences. One evening, a new well-meaning volunteer, a young woman named Sarah, tidied up Rusty's enclosure while he was distracted by a particularly fascinating feather. She saw the grimy, slobber-covered fish, and thinking she was being helpful, tucked it away on a high shelf to be cleaned later. Bedtime arrived. Rusty, tired from a long day of being an adorable menace, trotted over to his sheepskin rug. He looked left. He looked right. No. Finnegan. He let out a questioning chirp, then a louder meow. When the fish failed to magically appear, the protest began in earnest. It started as a series of annoyed, high-pitched yowls. Within 10 minutes, it had escalated into a full-throated, dramatic lament that echoed through the entire sanctuary. It was a sound that could curdle milk, cry of such profound betrayal and anguish that it sounded, as Hank put it, like a rusty gate swinging in a hurricane during a catfight. Jenna came running from her office. "What on earth is going on?" "It's Rusty," Hank said, trying not to laugh. "Someone's broken the law. The fish is missing." A sanctuary-wide alert went out. Sarah, realizing her terrible mistake, turned pale. "I put it on the shelf," she stammered. But the fish wasn't on the shelf. The search began. Staff members were on their hands and knees peering under furniture, checking behind supply cabinets, all while Rusty's operatic protests provided a frantic soundtrack. The other animals in the sanctuary, disturbed by the racket, began to call out in confusion. The owls hooted, the resident fox barked, and even the old, deaf raccoon poked his head out of his den. Finally, after 15 minutes of mounting chaos, Hank, armed with a flashlight, peered behind the small refrigerator in the clinic's break room. And there it was. Finnegan had evidently been knocked off the shelf and had bounced into the dusty space behind the appliance. "Got it," Hank declared, holding the dusty fish aloft like a trophy. He presented it to Rusty, who immediately fell silent. The Bobcat snatched the fish, gave it a thorough sniffing over to ensure it was unharmed, and then shot Hank a look of pure, unadulterated disdain, as if to say, "And you call this a professional operation?" He then trotted back to his rug, Finnegan firmly in his grasp, curled up, and was asleep in seconds, purring like a well-oiled V8 engine. Sarah was mortified, but Jenna just laughed, patting her on the shoulder. "Lesson learned," she said kindly. "Around here, that fish is more important than the head vet." As Rusty grew, so did his personality. He was charismatic and clever, with an endearing streak of wildness that was always tempered by his comical attachment to his toy. He graduated from the clinic to a large, custom-built outdoor enclosure complete with trees to climb, logs to scratch, and a small pool to splash in. It was designed to mimic his natural habitat as much as possible. But even in this wild-looking space, a flash of lurid yellow could always be seen. He'd bat Finnegan into the pool and then rescue him with a dramatic splash. He'd carry him up the tallest log and survey his kingdom, his trusty fish companion by his side. Jenna and the sanctuary board made the difficult but necessary decision that Rusty could never be released back into the wild. Having been raised by humans from such a young age, he was too imprinted too comfortable around people. He lacked the essential fear of humans that would keep him safe. More importantly, he lacked a bobcat mother to teach him the finer points of hunting and survival. Releasing him would be a death sentence. So, Rusty was given a new vital role. He became the sanctuary's most popular ambassador. His enclosure was on the public tour route, and his story was a powerful tool for education. Jenna would stand before the enclosure and tell the visitors about the devastating flood, about finding this tiny half-dead kitten, and about the silly stuffed fish that saved his life. At first, visitors would see a magnificent wild animal. Rusty grew into a truly impressive bobcat. He was 40 pounds of sleek muscle with powerful hunches, beautifully tufted tail, and ears tipped with long black hairs that gave him a look of perpetual alertness. He moved with the silent, fluid grace of a predator. People would gasp at his wild beauty, and then Jenna would point to the corner of the enclosure. "He's a wild animal through and through," she would say. "But every wild animal is also a vulnerable individual. And Rusty, well, Rusty has a secret." Right on cue. As if he understood his role in the performance, Rusty would often trot over to his den and emerge with the now tattered and faded Finnegan in his mouth. He would plop down in a patch of sun, the fierce-looking bobcat with his goofy toy, and begin to groom the fish with intense concentration before settling down for a nap. His formidable paws wrapped gently around it. The effect on the visitors was instantaneous. Hardened faces would soften. Skeptical teenagers would break into smiles. Little children would point and giggle. They saw the contrast, the wild predator and the soft toy, and they understood. They saw not just a species but an individual with a story, a personality, and a need for comfort just like them. His story raised more donations and awareness for the sanctuary's work than any slick brochure ever could. He was a living, breathing, purring testament to the fact that every life is precious and that compassion can be found in the most unexpected forms. Even a goggle-eyed plush fish. Years passed. Rusty became a fixture, a grand old man of the sanctuary. His face grew a little broader, his movements a little more deliberate, but his devotion to Finnegan never wavered. The fish was now a shadow of its former self. Its lurid yellow had faded to a pale lemon. One of its googly eyes had fallen off in a particularly rambunctious wrestling match, and its tail was frayed and thin. Hank had performed emergency surgery on it more than once, carefully stitching up rips and tears with heavy-duty thread. It was, by any measure, a wreck, but to Rusty it was priceless. One crisp autumn evening, long after the last visitors had gone home, Jenna took a quiet walk around the sanctuary for her final rounds. The air was cool and smelled of woodsome smoke and pine. She stopped at Rusty's enclosure, her breath misting in the twilight. There he was, curled up in his favorite spot. He was a truly majestic sight, the setting sun catching the reddish highlights in his thick coat and tucked securely in his embrace, held fast by those powerful paws with their formidable claws, his murder mittens, was the tattered, one-eyed, pale yellow fish. As she watched, Rusty shifted in his sleep, pulling the toy closer. A deep, contented rumble, the same purr she'd first heard all those years ago, vibrated through his body. He let out a soft sigh, a sound of perfect peace. Jenna smiled, a deep, genuine smile that reached her eyes. The heart-wrenching image of the tiny, shivering kitten she had first held in Her hands was a lifetime away. In its place was this powerful, beautiful survivor. The fish, she thought, wasn't just a toy. It was a promise kept. It was a symbol of safety in a scary world. Fluffy anchor that had allowed a terrified orphan to heal and to thrive. He was a fearsome feline with the fluffiest, most heartwarming secret, a living reminder that sometimes the greatest strength is found in the gentle act of holding on to something you love. And under the rising moon, the wild Bobcat slept on, dreaming his wild dreams with his oldest friend locked safely in his arms.